On December 3, 1992, the Rent Stabilization Association organized a conference to explore the issues which threaten New York's economic base and its rental housing, and to develop a blueprint for survival. Conference participants included the heads of every city and state agency which affects rental housing, state and city elected leaders, and representatives of the housing industry and related industries. Mayor David Dinkins delivered the keynote address.
I'm pleased to have this opportunity to speak with so many of our city's rental property owners as the Rent Stabilization Association kicks off this very important conference. And as I just glance out at the audience, I can't see too far because I'm nearsighted, but I do see. Senator, it's nice to be with you. How are you? But what a distinguished audience. The fact is, in a city as complex and diverse as ours, you play an absolutely crucial role, not only by contributing to our economic base, but also by providing the housing opportunities that our families and individuals need and demand. As this audience certainly knows, New York is unique among major cities in the high proportion of residents that live in rental housing. A full 70% of our city's housing units are renter-occupied apartments, more than half of which are rent-controlled, rent-regulated, or rent-stabilized. And unlike some other cities, New York's reliance on rental housing spans all economic levels. And that's why this conference is so very, very important. New York's rental housing is a crucial part of our city's infrastructure, and we must do all we can to protect and to preserve it. I'm pleased that so many members of my administration are taking part in today's panel discussion, including Deputy Mayor Barbara Fife, who's here, the chair of the city's Rent Guidelines Board, our commissioners of finance, housing, preservation and development, environmental protection, and sanitation. Each is here. They will be talking about a number of issues which are of critical concern to this association and our city, such as water rates, rent regulation, recycling, and financing.
Who are the owners of New York's regulated rental buildings? Only 15% of them are corporations or investors who own over 60 apartments. The rest are small businessmen and women, mom-and-pop landlords who collectively own nearly half of what remains of New York City's private rental housing stock. 60% own less than 20 apartments. Over 50% are foreign-born immigrants. 87% manage their own buildings. They have made many sacrifices to own and hold on to their buildings. They live in fear of the unknown, the uncontrollable cost of metered water use, the unforeseen cost of lead paint abatement, and ever-increasing taxes and fees.
I have an affection for the building because I lived there since I was 12 years old. I mean, that's 30 years ago. I'm 42 years old now. I mean, I'm still going up the same steps that I did when I was 12, and I have a feeling for the building. I mean, I know the minute when something is wrong, we know. I mean, my mother, her big problem is that she loves the building too much. I mean, she's up 3 o'clock in the morning listening to see if the boiler's shut off or if it came on at 5:30. I mean, the woman gets about maybe 3 or 4 hours sleep a night because that building is on her brain. It's on her mind, and it's been this way for 20 years. I don't think you'll ever find a landlord in the history of New York City that cares any more about the building than she cared about that building. So I've been telling her lately, Ma, I think it's about that time, you know, time to maybe just back off a bit, you see, because she's there 24 hours a day, where I'm not there 24 hours a day. She's there all the time. If no disaster happens to you in the summer and you can get your real estate taxes and water and sewage bills paid and everything paid, then you can continue to make it. But I mean, if things get any more frustrating, if they heap any more garbage on us than they've been heaping, I can't see anybody making it, at least not guys in my bracket. I can see a guy with a big high-rise maybe making it, but not me. My mom, for many years, without my knowledge, spent every last dime that my father had left to her in the world. At that time, we were having that so-called oil crisis, and she used every dime that he left. I mean, she never came to me once and said, well, hey, son, you know, I'm not doing so good. I didn't find out until about maybe like 1982, 3 or so, that she was really catching it with that building, and it had gotten to the point where she was about to lose it. Then she stepped in and said, we're having trouble. I had to go into my account and take out the money, and I paid off we still owed the city money on the original mortgage. I paid all that off for her, and I paid all her back taxes, and then she took it on from there. But she was using her Social Security money at the point where my dad's money had run out, which had been about maybe 10 years. Then she started on her Social Security check. But she cared if those people in that building had heat and hot water. Many of them that were still in there were her friends. And she was going to sacrifice so they wouldn't have to go without.
None of these agencies, from sanitation, from pest control, from fire department, from the fees that are charged for, what was the latest one? Oh, the latest tax, which was the police tax. What police? And then our fuel storage tax permit. Well, that's, what else can we think of? It's just, it is purely, none of it is to support housing. None of it is to support individuals who are in this endeavor. None of it is to support people who are working in this field. I had a choice of having 2 of my small buildings go in REM or canceling the health insurance for these families that work for me and have young children. Well, what the hell kind of choice is that? We have an enormous bureaucracy in pest control. Let's get them in here and control the pests. Don't just fine me. I don't think they've seen any poison in years. They've just seen checks. This is what the men who are cleaning in the buildings or tidying up the garbage, this is what they're reaching into. These are all over our hallways. The men know how to work with this. We know how to be careful about the bullets, and it doesn't mean that we're any less abusive to the drug dealers. But these we can handle. You're dealing with human beings in this. My biggest fear is that I'm not dealing with human beings when I'm dealing with the city of New York.
Once I became involved with buildings, very shortly I realized owning a building in New York is not just taking care of building. It's all the paperwork, the DHCR, the HPD. They load us up with all the paperwork and ambiguous and duplicating rules and regulations. For a person who, like me, I have a college education, I have an education, a degree in architecture, and I know how to add and subtract, but I cannot deal with DHCR's paperwork, I cannot deal with HPD's paperwork. It's just totally impossible because owning a building, managing a building is no longer just to fix this, fix that. You have to be a lawyer, an accountant, a legal expert to read their laws and rules and regulations. Most of the time I find that I can't understand.
I don't know how the average small property owner can begin to comply with the state and city regulations. As you can see, this is just a small portion of the hundreds of people that we've had to hire to deal with the governmental bureaucracy that the real estate industry has been faced with. The city and the state have enacted regulations in geometrical proportions over the last number of years, and I don't know how the small owner can comply. We barely can do it with our expertise. Dealing with DHCR is an impossible bureaucracy. We take 4 steps back before we can take 1 step forward. We've some of the finest people in the industry here and still can barely deal with the administrative bureaucracy.
Owners must deal with more than 24 city and state agencies, which takes up a major portion of the small owner's life. New York's rent regulations are the harshest in the free world and effectively deprive owners of control of their buildings. They cannot set the amount of the rent. They cannot determine the amount of the increase. They cannot make changes or improvements to the building without permission from the tenants and state and city agencies. They cannot take the apartments off the market when they are ready to retire. They cannot evict a tenant for non-payment of rent or criminal activities without permission from the housing courts. But housing courts are protective of tenants and have frequently allowed tenants to stay on without paying rent for months at a time.
The basic agenda here in housing court is to prevent eviction. And many small property owners find that shocking. They come here expecting justice, expecting that they will be able to collect their back rent in a non-payment case, expecting that they will be able to evict the problem nuisance tenant who is harassing other tenants in their building in a holdover case, and expecting that they will be able to get a unit in their building for their own family's personal use. And they're constantly thwarted when they get here. They are disillusioned. They are very upset.
Tenants come down here and they're taught by judges who give sermons from the bench that don't worry about not paying your rent. We're not going to throw you into the street. Now, when 200-300 tenants hear this, what are they expected to do? But not to pay rent. A judge is telling them, don't worry, we're not going to throw you out.
I have been trying to get a trial from the housing court for the last 3 years, and the legal aid, Mr. Sayeta, has been all the time dismissing our case by technicalities.
When you look in the courthouse, it's old people that down there. I was down there a week ago. A tenant owes an old lady $9,000. How is she going to make it? She can't make it.
If the judges, the court, don't treat landlord better, New York will fall, because landlords who are housing these poor people will just feel like running and leave the building, because you have the large taxes to pay, the insurance and everything. Sometimes, if I don't work, I don't pay my rent. My mortgage was at $1,171 a month.
On this box is paperwork that I had to do for 3 different cases of illegal tenants in the building, and it cost me years of my life filling out the forms, going to court, and so much money just to prove that these people were doing something illegally.
If I cannot collect my rent, I cannot pay my bills. That's the bottom line. I mean, it's like we're the only business in the world that has to continue to provide service even though someone's not paying us. I mean, that's crazy. If you got food, clothing, and shelter. Can you imagine the food or the clothes of the guy going through what we're going through? I mean, if I came into a guy's restaurant and sat down and ate a big turkey dinner every day, and he has to send for the cops to throw me out because I'm not paying for the food, and some judge telling me, you still got to give this guy a big turkey dinner every day, where would I be? If I ordered a suit from a guy and the guy makes me a tailor-made suit and I don't pay him, they would say, hey, well, you're a rotten guy for not paying this guy for the suit. But a guy's living in my apartment. I have to still send him hot water. I got to still send him steam. I got to still do this for him, that for him. He's got my 4 walls, all my appliances, he's using everything. Doesn't pay me, has a judge stand behind him. Then he slips out into the middle of the night after I've spent who knows how many dollars in legal fees. I can't see anyone making it behind that.
Carpenter, window washer, janitor, painter, garbage collector, lawyer, accountant, social worker. The typical New York City landlord is all these things and more. But increasingly, there is the sense that time and the system are against them.
We can rehabilitate one of these apartments for 5 to 6, maybe 8,000 max, whereas a city will house someone in a shelter for 30, 40,000 a year, and it just doesn't make any sense. Okay, we took over the building about 11 years ago from my father, who couldn't deal with the bureaucracy. It just wasn't working. Taxes were going up, water was going up, and rental income just wasn't coming up. It's just a lot of work. It's been a fight ever since. The city does everything it can to not help small landlords. Try to get a loan out of a bank when someone's paying $40 a month rent, and it just doesn't work. Very hard to rehabilitate, very hard. Why do I go on? Well, like everyone else, I have a dream. One of these days it's going to work. One of these days the city will realize that they're losing a lot more property than they're gaining. They have to change some of the laws. Biggest fear is not having the money when the tax time rolls around and have the city come and get it from me. I'm always on edge. I don't sleep at tax time. I don't sleep at all.
The government, they make the rules. They set the payments and things that a landlord should get. And if they do the same thing that they do to us, if they do that to restaurants and other businesses, New York City would be dead because you would have no restaurant, you would have no other businesses. A landlord job is 24 hours a day. My tenant call me all the time, anything, I have to be around. And you know, it's just not fair. It's just not fair. And we're talking about free enterprise, we're talking about, you know, having your own business. No way. Everything has increased, and my rent has not caught up with it. And my fear is this, that after taking good hard money and putting into this business, one day I will have to walk away from the building. And then it would be just chaos. You know, that's what it is, because you cannot be taking money from other places all the time. It's going to dry up, and when it's dry up and I can't pay the taxes, and I can't pay the water, and I can't pay the insurance, I'm out of business. I have invested my hard-earned money, and you should be fair. I should get a return on my money, just as how the big companies are getting a return on the money. That's all I ask for. I have nothing against tenants. They are part of my business, and without them, I don't have any business. But at the same time, if I'm giving them a service, and I know I'm giving them a good service, I should get a fair return for my money.
Thousands of New Yorkers are in danger of being forced out of their homes because their landlords can't pay the bills. Channel 2's Mike Taibbi is in Manhattan now with a story of the latest victims of the recession. Mike?
Michelle, we're talking about potential victims. The building behind me at 10th Avenue and 42nd Street is a building in trouble, one of many thousands in this city. Many windows broken and boarded up, and those few tenants still living in this building wondering how long they'll live there. The last time that thousands of buildings like this were dumped on the city was in the recession of 1968, 1972 in that area. One year, more than 10,000 such buildings becoming the city's problem. Can it happen again on that scale? In the wake of our current lingering recession, the new study out today says it can.
He wants us out.
Yeah.
He don't want us to pay rent. He wants us out of here.
Carmelo Gonzalez says he hasn't paid rent in years on his small apartment at 10th Avenue and 42nd Street. For one thing, nobody fixes anything. The building is a fire trap and often lacks water or electricity or both. For another, the building's all but abandoned. After years of decay, only 9 of the 52 apartments are occupied. Finally, even the building's super couldn't tell us who the rent would be paid to.
Who owns the building, Dennis? Tell you the truth, I don't know. Because it changed so much time, about 3 different times, it changed management.
What is known is that this is a building whose owners seem to be in the process of giving up. It's happening in historically poorer neighborhoods in central Harlem, Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights, and Bushwick, Brooklyn, and Mott Haven in the Bronx. And it's happening here in Clinton, amid the forest of luxury towers spawned by 80s investment. Question, is it happening at a greater rate now than in the recent past? Well, a nonprofit agency called the Community Service Society of New York has just spent $500,000 in grant money to crunch some numbers and find out just how much trouble, how many rental properties in New York City are in right now. And the story told by those numbers is a grim one. All told, some 7,500 multiple dwelling buildings with 140,000 apartments are threatened with abandonment because the owners owe back taxes or are already in foreclosure proceedings. That's 1 in 6 buildings in the 5 boroughs in '92. When the ratio was 1 in 16 as recently as 1988. What's especially ominous is that in 1988, 9 out of every 10 property owners facing foreclosure would find a way to pay their back taxes and hold on to their buildings. Today's story?
Right now, only 1 out of 4 properties are being redeemed by owners who can pay back taxes to the city and recover properties the city would otherwise foreclose.
Well, this building behind me, known as 500 10th Avenue, is not in immediate danger of foreclosure. The owners, who include First New York Bank, have cut a deal with the city to pay the taxes that are owed, over $120,000 worth, in installments. However, as you just heard from Mr. Bach, many other owners of similar buildings have not been making those payments, and that threatens or promises big trouble for the city of New York. In Manhattan, Mike Taibbi, Channel 2 News, reporting live. Back to the studio.
Mike, the city's tax base continues to dry up.
Yes, it does, and I don't know what happens to the people who live in these buildings. I just talked to a bunch of them today, and they have no idea. They can't even get anybody on the phone to ask what's going to happen.
Before I ask Peter Vallone to come up, I want to lay out what I think are the workings of a blueprint that we can all walk out of here today and begin developing. Number 1, I think all of us can agree that the survival of rental housing is essential to the economic well-being of the city of New York. Anybody disagree with that? 2, that rental housing is in trouble and without action now, it may be too late, and that next legislative session in Albany is key. Anybody disagree with that? 3, that we need to contain building operating costs, the point that Felice Machete made. The tax freeze is important, and we must keep it. Assessments, in my estimation, must be frozen as well. I know that's controversial, but something has to be done when values are going down, market values with assessed values going up. Water and sewer. We're going to continue to fight the metering, but absent court intervention, we need caps and/or transitional increases where owners know what's going to happen to them next year. Lead paint. I think we already talked about this, and we've agreed on it, that we can't do anything, or any effort legislatively to require abatement or removal of all lead paint will bankrupt this city and will bankrupt this industry, and it can't be done. We have to do management of this issue, and we have to deal with the peeling paint, not intact paint. Recycling. I think we all agree that we need to educate the generators of the garbage. We need to get to the people who are creating this garbage and make sure that they recycle it and separate it. As far as housing court, legislatively, we need stronger laws to deal with the deposit of rent in court, and we've got to work on the election of judges or the selection of judges. I think overall, I think it's been clear today that there's not anybody up here who thinks rent regulation is working well, and we need to revamp this system, streamline it, and take a real close look at combining both of these systems, not by combining the worst of both, but by understanding that we need to identify the people that we're trying to protect and not protect everybody who doesn't need that protection. We need to end duplication of regulation. And I think we've got a commitment at least to start talking about that. And bottom line is that we really need to convince the members of the Rent Guidelines Board that rent increases must reflect economic reality. And that's not an easy one for anybody, because nobody wants to raise their rents on people who live in your buildings, but if government's forcing you to pay more, then somebody else is going to have to pay that as well. Incentives to upgrade property. We've got to take another look at MCIs and the J51. The council has before them the J51 bill. We really have to take a look at giving back those rent increases that were subtracted off if you choose to take both MCIs and J51. I think we can all agree that more incentives to upgrade housing are essential.
Thank you very much. My Republican leader, sitting to my side, Freddie. I see in the audience we have Ken Fisher and Sam Horowitz, quite a few council members around. Archie Spigner left. Let me tell you, what you're doing today makes a real difference. It really does. Just the number of people that you have here indicates, and the number of city officials and commissioners and deputy mayor, and I understand the mayor was here earlier this morning. This is what changes government. We know the importance of preserving the city's rental housing market and fostering a better climate for its growth. We also know the huge investment you have made in this city. And without you, we have no city.